You're blessed for being here. We got a lot of people gone today. Kids are gone. We really miss them. Boy, I tell you what, I got a pretty good group of kids, and Cade's doing a great job, and really thankful for him. There's an old hymn. We don't sing it much. I asked Grant if he knew it, and he didn't, but kind of an old hymn that kind of inspired this lesson a little bit. I don't know if you've ever sung this before or not. I've led it a couple of times. Let's see the first, second, and third verse. First, second, and third. Kind of goes with this lesson a little bit, but just listen to the words of this song. It's really kind of got a powerful message. Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall, friendless, forsaken, betrayed by all. Hearken what meaneth the sudden call. What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus, my friend? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, oh friend, what will he do with me? Jesus is standing on trial still. You can be false to him if you will. You can be faithful through good or ill. What will you do with Jesus? Oh, what will you do with Jesus, my friend? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, oh friend, what will he do with me? Will you evade him as Pilate tried? Or will you choose him whate'er betide? Vainly you struggle from him to hide. What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with Jesus, my friend? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, oh friend, what will he do with me? You know, Pilate had a real role to play, didn't he, in Jesus and the crucifixion. He had to do a certain thing. He had to walk in a certain way. He had to make this happen. And Pilate was real integral in Jesus going to the cross. We often maybe don't realize what a role he played in that. They had to have him to get done what they needed to get done. And Pilate had decisions to make, didn't he? You know, the truth is, with Pilate or with any of us, when Jesus steps into our life, things really get complicated sometimes. We have to make a decision. Who is he? What is he? What does he mean to me? What about eternity? What do I do? What do I think? How should I respond? When Jesus really steps into our life, it really kind of complicates things for us because we have to make a decision. As the song says, neutral you cannot be. You know, you're either on one side of this or the other. You either believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, you believe that he died for your sins, or you don't. There's no in between here. There's no gray area. There's no, well, I think I stand in the middle. There's no middle. You're either one way or another. A decision has to be made. You know, the truth is, Pilate would have been a lot happier man if Jesus had never stepped into his life. No doubt about that. Pilate had to make a decision and made a decision that he didn't want to make. I'm sure of that. But he could have made the other decision, couldn't he? It was his decision to make. He could have decided. And yet he decided the wrong way, but the right way for us, right? Jesus asked a real important question, didn't he? Who is this Jesus? Who is he? Who are you? What do I have to do with you? Why are you in front of me? Why are you standing here? Why do I have to make a decision? Pilate probably had a lot of thoughts going through his mind. He probably was like, why didn't you just leave me out of this thing, right? This isn't a Roman problem. This is a Jewish problem. Why am I in the middle of it? But they wanted to crucify him. They needed Pilate to do it. Pilate would have just as soon never had to have gone through this. This wasn't a good day for him, right? But here he was. Here he was faced with this decision. And he had to make a tough choice. Who is he? You know, that's the choice you and I have to make. Who is he? Is he really the Son of God? Is he not? Is he really who he says he is? It's critical that we make that decision. It's critical that we make that decision. We decide, who is he? Well, Pilate did what a lot of us would do. He said, well, I'm going to put it off on somebody else. That's one of my favorite things to do in life, right? I'll just put this off on somebody else. I don't want to have to deal with this. I'm going to put it on somebody else's shoulders. So Pilate sends him to Herod Antipas, who was the king of Galilee at that time. Pilate sends him to Herod and said, well, let him decide what to do. We'll let him make a decision because I don't want to decide. You know, in life, we do that a lot, don't we? And even with Jesus, we do that. We look to other people. I just had a conversation with a girl in our congregation, and she was questioning her faith, questioning who Jesus really was. And that's valid. And she was raised in it, raised in the church, raised going to church every day, raised doing those things. But eventually it came down to her decision. Who is he? Well, she'd been told her whole life, her parents had told her whole life who Jesus was. She understood that, but it was somebody else's decision, wasn't it? It wasn't hers. Her parents had decided who Jesus was. So many times in life with us, that's how it is. Maybe we're raised in the faith, raised in the church. We never really asked that question ourselves. We just heard it our whole lives, so we assume it has to be true. Somebody else made the decision for us. But as I told her, I said, your parents' faith will never get you to heaven. Somebody else's faith, somebody else's belief is never going to get you to heaven. It has to be yours. It has to belong to you. Christ has to belong to you. You know, and as a parent, that's the greatest thing in life when you can see that in your child, that Jesus really belongs to them, that it's their faith, not your faith, but their faith. I told her, I said, you know, sometimes it'd be easier if maybe you were raised up with no faith, and then you could come to that on your own, come to that conclusion on your own. It'd really be yours. You see, it'd really be yours. It's a hard conversation to have because at some point in your life, you have to decide. And that decision is going to impact the rest of your life. And I believe it's going to impact your eternity. So it's more important than just what you decide here. And it's not something that someone else can do for you. It's something you have to do for yourself. Faith has to be yours. It has to belong to you. If it belongs to anybody else, it's never going to get you through. And it's so important that we develop our own faith. So we come back to the question, who is he? Who is he? You know, when we think about that, so many times we're influenced by other people, aren't we? By what other people think. Well, who do you think Jesus is? Who do you believe he is? You know, I watched a thing the other day, and this guy, random thing, you know, you get these things all the time, where this guy walks into these people, in this city, I think it was Chicago. I'm not sure, I believe that's where it was. And basically, he walked up to these people just randomly, and he says, who's Jesus Christ? You know, to me, that seems like the simplest question on earth, doesn't it? But it's interesting because all these people that he asked, none of them had my answer. And they said, well, who's Jesus Christ? And some people say, well, he's a historical figure. You know, he's somebody in history, somebody we hear about. Who's Jesus Christ? Well, he was a good man. He was a good guy. Who was Jesus Christ? Well, he was a teacher. Who was Jesus Christ? I really don't know. I really don't know. It was just fascinating to me because in my world, in my life, it's just a simple answer. But people don't know that. They didn't know that. You know, we're influenced, aren't we, by people around us, by things we read, by articles we see. And in the case of Pilate, it was no different. Pilate's wife sent him a message. I have nothing to do with this righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him. This righteous man, she really doesn't say who he is, but she says he's a righteous man. Don't have anything to do with him, right? Don't have anything to do with this guy because I had a vision. But the chief priests and the elders were persuading the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. And the governor said to them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? And they said, crucify him. Crucify him. You know, people influence our beliefs, influence our faith, influence our vision, our picture of Jesus Christ. And if you don't believe that's true, then just think about your life. What do you think Jesus looks like? That European guy on the cross with the flowing hair, right? Well, that's influenced. That's by art. That wasn't anything what Jesus looked like, I promise you. Promise you. If you had to pick Jesus out of a lineup and that guy was there, don't choose him. That's not him, right? Because that's not what he looks like. But yet we're influenced, aren't we? Influenced in our belief, influenced in what we think Jesus is and who Jesus is and what Jesus is about. And those things happen to us because people are talking to us. And Pilate was no different. On one hand, his wife saying, don't have anything to do with this righteous man. I had a vision. Don't have anything to do with him. And on the other hand, the Pharisees are saying, you need to persecute him. We need to crucify him because he says he's God. He says he's the Son of God. And it's blasphemy, and we need to crucify him. And Pilate's in the middle of this. And Pilate's standing in the middle of this whole thing. And Pilate knows he can't put it off on somebody else. Pilate knows he has to make a decision. So finally, Pilate just has to ask him, who are you? Right? Isn't that what we should do? So Pilate finally just has to ask him. And it's one of the greatest, without John, we wouldn't have this. But thankfully for John, we have this. And it's just such a powerful testimony. It's one of the few times Jesus really speaks about who I am. And Pilate entered again. You got to picture the scene here. This is Holy Week. This is Passover, right? So the Jews don't want to be unclean. And part of not being unclean is you can't go into the house of a Gentile. Well, you really never want to do that anyway if you were a Jew, but you really didn't want to do it right now because Passover was coming. So they couldn't enter into the house of a Gentile. So the Praetorium, which is where Pilate is, that's considered the house of a Gentile. So they can't go in. So the Jews are all on the street. They're not even in here where Jesus is. The Jews are all on the street, right? And Jesus is inside, and Pilate's inside. So this whole time, Jesus is having to go out and talk to the Jews, go back in and talk to Pilate, go back out and talk to the Jews, right? Because they're all out on the street. So in this whole time, this is what it says here. So it says Pilate entered again into the Praetorium. So he entered back in. He's talked to the Jews. The Jews said to crucify him. So he goes back in to talk to Jesus. And he goes back into this Praetorium and summoned Jesus. He says, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered. He says, you saying this on an own initiative? Or do others tell you about me? And Pilate answered, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation, the chief priest, delivered you to me. What have you done? Why are you here? What's wrong with you? Pretty pointed question. Jesus has a chance to defend himself here. Stand up and say, I don't deserve to be here. I'm a righteous man. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't broken any Jewish laws. I haven't done anything to be here for. But you know, Isaiah 53 said, as a lamb was silent for his shears, so he didn't open his mouth. So he's not going to make a defense for himself here because it's prophesied that he wouldn't do that. And Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting, so I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. So Pilate said, so you are a king. Because that could be a problem. So you are a king. And Jesus answered, you say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Who are you? Are you a king? Yes. Much more than a king. But Jesus wasn't going to defend himself. Jesus didn't have to prove himself to Pilate. I always thought it was a fascinating statement where Jesus says, did you come to this of your own, or did somebody tell you? Pilate never really answered the question, did he? Because it would have made a difference in the life of Pilate. Because if Pilate had come to that conclusion on his own, it would have been a little hard for Pilate to sentence him to be crucified. But Pilate reached that because of the influence of others, because they were pushing for it to happen. And so Pilate, he thinks, well, there's got to be a way out of this, right? I mean, that's what he's thinking. You don't want to make your wife mad, right? His wife said, don't do it. Pilate's like, if I do this, I'm going to pay for this for a while, right? I don't want to make my wife mad. So I don't really want to crucify him. Don't really think he's done anything wrong. But on the other hand, I got all these Jews out here, these angry Jews, right? And that's going to be a real problem. I need a way out. Need a way out. So Pilate had this, there was a tradition where he released a criminal to him on this day. They could choose who they wanted to be released. So Pilate chose the worst, the murderer, Barabbas. And he held it up, these two men before them. Jesus Christ, who really had done nothing wrong. Jesus Christ, who his wife said was a righteous man. Jesus Christ, who had healed and the multitudes and fed the multitudes, healed the sick. And he held up to them a murderer, Barabbas, one who had murdered somebody, who had taken somebody's life. And he held him up to them, and I really think it's prophetic because he says, choose life or choose death, right? You make the choice. Choose life, choose Jesus Christ, choose this righteous man, or choose a murderer, choose death. What will you choose? And he held him up in front of him. And the man called Barabbas was in prison for insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. This is a bad guy, bad man, a man who deserves the punishment that's set before him. If you really think about it, maybe this is the first man that Jesus saved, huh? He saved him from the cross, didn't he? He gave his life in place of this man. That's what propitiation means. I don't think Jesus maybe did it willingly here, but he gave his life for this man. Who do you want me to release to you? The King of the Jews? Asked Pilate. I always like how he led him here, right? He didn't say, who do you want me to release, Barabbas or the King of the Jews? He led him. He wanted to release Jesus. Who do you want me to release, the King of the Jews? He led him. Asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy. But the crowd, the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. Barabbas, choose life or choose death. And they chose death, didn't they? But one day, it won't be us judging who Jesus is. It will be Jesus judging who we are. One day, Pilate will be the one standing, or is, I'm sure, by now. One day, Pilate stood, right, to be judged for who he was. He wasn't the judge anymore. He wasn't the judge anymore. He was the defendant. Today, you and I are the judge. We got to decide who Jesus is. Is he really the Son of God? Is he really God in the flesh? Is he really the Savior that came into the world for the sins of mankind? Did he really die on a cross and was risen from the dead? Is that who he is? Is that Jesus or not? There's no in the middle. It's one way or another. And we're the judge. Today, you're the judge. You get to decide. But one day, you'll be the defendant. And you'll stand before Jesus Christ. And you'll be the one answering the questions. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians, he said, we all must appear before the judgment seat of Christ. All of us. So that each one may recompense for the deeds of his body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Jesus says, if you confess me before men, I will confess you before my Father in heaven. Well, today's the day. Our life's the time. We get to decide that. Do we confess him before men? Do we choose him? Do we say he's the Son of God? Or do we not? Who do you say that I am? That's the biggest question I'll ever ask somebody in their entire life. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say I am? That's what he asked him. Who do you say that I am? You know, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Might say it again after this at some point if I'm around long enough. But you know, when I baptized my father, which I thought would never happen in my life, and my father was a man who He was a true definition of an agnostic. Who was Jesus Christ? He was a good man, historical figure. That's it. My whole life, that's who my dad was. We'd get up and go to church. My dad stayed home. Didn't care for it, didn't want anything to do with it. When I got older, I'd ask him. Didn't care anything about it. Didn't believe who Jesus was. My whole life. He was a true definition of an agnostic. That means someone without knowledge of God. He was a true definition of that. Started coming to church with us. Eileen Reed. I love Eileen. I miss Eileen. Eileen this morning we was singing. And Eileen just walked up to him one day and she says, "Are you going to get baptized?" I would have never asked that of my dad in a million years. Sad as that seems. I would have never done it. And he did. He said he would. And when I got him in this baptistry, the hardest question I think I ever asked anybody in my entire life, matter of fact, I know it is, hardest question I ever asked anybody in my entire life, because I didn't know what he would say. I said, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God?" A man who for 90 years, 80-something years, had told me he didn't believe that. Hardest question I ever asked. I just didn't know what he would say. I'm in the water with him. What am I going to say if he says I don't believe that, right? Maybe I shouldn't wait that long to ask somebody. And I said, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God?" He said, "I do." Best words I ever heard in my entire life. Because in the end, the question comes down to, who do you say I am? And if you say that he's the Son of God, it changes everything, doesn't it? And that's what he asked Peter in Matthew 16. And Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." He says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." You know, the most powerful statement you can ever make in your entire life is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And believe it in your heart and to know it's true. And if you do that, it changes your life. It might complicate your life, but it changes your life. If Pilate would have believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, he would have never hung him on a tree. Do you believe that? I do. But Pilate didn't know what to believe. Pilate didn't have an idea of what to think, of what to do. Pilate didn't look at the evidence, did he? Pilate listened to the people around him. Pilate listened to the Pharisees. He listened to his wife. He asked Jesus, but he never looked at the evidence, did he? He never called the people in that Jesus had regained their sight. He never called the people in that Jesus had fed. He never called the people in that Jesus raised from the dead. He never called Lazarus in and said, "Lazarus, what happened to you? What did Jesus do to you?" He never looked at the evidence. He just looked at the world around him and the people around him, and he let them influence him to believe what he believed, and he made a decision that was wrong, but it was right for us. The world's the same way. The world wants Jesus how they want him. They want to make him what they want him to look like. They want him to be who they want him to be. They want him to accept what they want him to accept. They want him to follow in what they think. They want a Jesus that looks like the Jesus they want him to look like. And they never look at the evidence. If they looked at the evidence, maybe they would understand who Jesus really is. That Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that Jesus Christ loves us, and that Jesus Christ died for us, but not everybody's going to be saved. And Jesus didn't say, "If you love me, do what you want to do." Jesus says, "If you love me, do what I want you to do." And Jesus never said a lot of the things that we think Jesus said. Jesus says, "If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. If you love me, you'll deny yourself and follow me. If you love me, you'll be my disciple. I won't be your disciple." So many times we want Jesus to be our disciple. But that's not what Jesus said. He says, "You're to be my disciple." Jesus said in John 5, "So you search the Scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. and it is these that testify about me. You are unwilling to come to me so that you may have life. You're unwilling. You're stubborn. You're stiff-necked. You believe what's going on around you. You believe what other people say. You don't look at the evidence. Jesus accused him so many times in John 6. He says, you come to me not because of who I am, not because of what I can do. You come to me because I fed you. You come to me because I was who you wanted me to be. But you didn't come to me to be who I want you to be. There's a big difference in that. We come to Jesus to be who he wants us to be. Sometimes we forget that. We're influenced, aren't we, by others. We're torn between different things, between the world and between what we see and between what we know, between what we were raised with. I wasn't raised with this faith. I came to it. And that's important. People say, why are you a Christian? Because my parents were Christians. Not a good answer. Not a good answer. Because my grandparent was a Christian. Not a good answer. Why are you a Christian? Because I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Right answer. Right answer. The truth is that you and I have to make a decision. We have to choose life, don't we? Just as when Pilate held up Barabbas and he held up Jesus, he says, which one do you want? Which one do you want me to release to you? They had to make a decision. Do we choose life or do we choose death? They chose death. You and I have a decision to make. Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, and if it's really translated right, it would read, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. I am life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If we choose Jesus Christ, we choose life. There is no other way. This is a decision you have to make, and your eternity depends on what you say, what you believe. Either you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and if it is, there's something you need to do, or you don't believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Based on that decision, you have to live your life. But have you looked at the evidence? That's what we need to do. We need to look at the evidence. Is Jesus Christ really who we think he is? We're going to do that in the next few Sundays. We're going to look at some evidence. Because you and I need to look at the evidence because we need to make a decision if we're right. Because Paul says in Corinthians, he says, if you have hope in this life only, you're of all men most miserable. If we don't have hope of eternity, we're of all men most miserable. In Matthew 27, he says, and the people said, let his blood be on us and on our children, as they were standing in the street. Pilate took the deal, he washed his hands. He said, I'm washing my hands, his blood ain't on me. And they said, let his blood be on us and on our children. And you know, it's so prophetic, isn't it? Because the truth is, his blood is on us, was on them, and on their children. And it's on us, and it's on our children. The only way, a decision we have to make is his blood on us for salvation, or is it on us for condemnation? Are we the ones that put him on that cross, our sin, and we still hold him there by the sins of our life? Are we the ones that look to the cross and look to the blood of Jesus as what cleanses us and what clothes us and what gives us a relationship with God? I promise you, one day his blood will be upon every person who ever lived upon this earth. And it will either be to condemn them or it will be to save them. The only decision that you have to make is which side do you stand on? What will you do with Jesus? What will you do with him? If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing?